The sun was just beginning to climb over the horizon, casting a soft, golden light across the beach. Jake, an early riser by habit, enjoyed the quiet moments the morning offered. His time to clear his head before the world woke up. His footsteps were the only sound, aside from the gentle lapping of the waves against the shore. As he walked, Jake's thoughts drifted to the work awaiting him back in his studio. He was a freelance software developer, which often meant long hours in front of a computer. These morning walks were his escape, his small slice of solitude. Suddenly, a faint splashing noise caught his attention. It was unusual for this hour, too rhythmic and desperate to be just the ocean playing with the shoreline. Curious, he scanned the water and spotted a figure struggling against the waves. Without a second thought, Jake kicked off his shoes and sprinted into the chilly water. As he swam closer, the figure's features became clearer. This was no human. The being in the water had smooth, iridescent skin that shimmered even in the dim light, and her limbs seemed too slender, too graceful for a human. "Hold on. I'm coming," Jake called out as he approached her. The figure turned her head towards him, her eyes wide with panic. As Jake reached her, he was struck by the vivid color of her eyes, like the deepest parts of the ocean. "I've got you," Jake assured her as he supported her back with one arm, swimming back to shore with the other. She was surprisingly light, her body buoyant in the salt water. Once on the beach, Jake helped her to sit up. She coughed up some water, then looked up at him, her expression a mix of confusion and relief. "Thank you," she said, her voice melodic but laced with a foreign accent Jake couldn't place. "Are you okay? What happened?" Jake asked, examining her for injuries. I'm not sure. I remember water, then darkness, and then you," she replied, looking around as if seeing the beach for the first time. "I'm Jake," he introduced himself, offering her a reassuring smile. "And you are?" "Lyra," she answered, her gaze still flicking uncertainly from the ocean to the sand beneath them. "Lyra, that's a beautiful name. Here, let's get you warmed up." Jake removed his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. The fabric was warm from his body heat, and she clutched it gratefully. "Do you need to go to a hospital? Or is there someone you need to call?" Jake's concern grew as he noticed her continued disorientation. No hospital. There is no one to call," Lyra said quickly, a hint of fear in her tone. "Well, okay. Let's get you to my place, then. It's just up the beach. You can warm up, and we can figure out what you need," Jake offered. Lyra nodded hesitantly, and together they walked along the beach, the early morning sun beginning to warm the sand. As they walked, Jake noticed her subtle attempts to disguise her limp. "You're sure you're all right?" he asked. "Yes, just a little cold," Lyra reassured him, her voice stronger now. They reached Jake's beach house, a small, cozy cottage with a view of the sea. As Jake led her inside, he couldn't shake the feeling that this morning's rescue might just be the beginning of something extraordinary. Inside the beach house, Jake handed Lyra a thick, soft towel and gestured toward the bathroom. "You can take a hot shower in there. I'll find some dry clothes you can wear." "Thank you, Jake," Lyra said, her voice still carrying a faint, melodic accent that intrigued him. She took the towel and paused, looking uncertain for a moment before heading into the bathroom. Jake rummaged through his drawers and found an old t-shirt and some sweatpants that he thought might fit her. He placed them outside the bathroom door and then went to the kitchen to make some coffee. The normalcy of the task seemed absurd given the morning's surreal events. As the coffee brewed, Jake's mind raced. Who was Lyra, really? Where did she come from, and how had she ended up in the water? His curiosity was piqued, not just by her otherworldly beauty, but by the mystery surrounding her. Lyra emerged from the bathroom a while later, her hair still damp but looking more composed in Jake's clothes, which were a bit large for her slender frame. "Feeling better?" Jake asked as he handed her a mug of coffee. "Yes, much better, thank you." Lyra took the mug, her fingers brushing against his, sending a small, unexpected jolt through him. They sat at the kitchen table, the early morning light casting soft shadows around the cozy room. Lyra sipped her coffee slowly, seeming to savor the warmth. "So, Lyra, can you tell me more about where you come from? I mean, you're obviously not from around here," Jake ventured, trying to keep his tone light. Lyra looked out the window toward the ocean, her expression distant. I am from Aquaria, far from here. It's not. It's not a place known to humans. Jake's eyebrows shot up. Aquaria? Never heard of it. Is that another country? No, not a country, Lyra corrected gently, a faint smile on her lips. Another planet. I suppose you would call me an alien. Jake blinked, processing her words. An alien, as an extraterrestrial? His voice was a mix of incredulity and fascination. Yes, exactly. Lyra nodded, her gaze meeting his. I know it must sound unbelievable. Unbelievable, but not impossible, Jake conceded, his mind open to possibilities, a trait that had always served him well as a software developer. So, how did you end up here? There was a malfunction, a storm. I was exploring, and then I was pulled here, to your ocean. Lyra's explanation was vague, and she seemed reluctant to delve into details. Well, you're safe here, Lyra. You can stay as long as you need to figure things out. Jake reassured her, sensing her discomfort. Lyra's eyes softened with gratitude. Thank you, Jake. Your kindness is overwhelming. They spent the morning talking, Jake asking questions about Aquaria and Lyra sharing stories of her world. A planet covered in vast oceans and islands, where cities were built underwater and people traveled in vehicles that glided through currents. As the sun climbed higher, Jake proposed a walk on the beach. You might feel more at home near the water, even if it's not exactly like your Aquarian seas. Lyra smiled, accepting his offer. I would like that very much. Together, they strolled along the shore, the waves brushing against their feet. Jake found himself increasingly captivated by Lyra's perspective on life in the universe, her descriptions painting a picture of a world both alien and mesmerizing. As they walked, Jake thought about the implications of her presence, both for himself and for Earth. He knew that the day ahead would be filled with more questions than answers, but for now, he was content to share this peaceful moment with someone from a world beyond his wildest imagination. After their walk along the beach, Jake and Lyra returned to the cottage, where they spent the afternoon sharing more about their respective worlds. Jake set up a couple of chairs on the deck, providing a view of the ocean that he hoped would make Lyra feel more at home. So, Lyra, Jake started, handing her a glass of iced tea. You've told me about Aquaria's oceans. What about the people? What are they like? Lyra took a sip, then smiled. We are not so different from humans, in some ways. We value family, community, and we seek to understand the universe around us. But we are also different. We communicate not just with words but with colors. Colors that we can emit through our skin, depending on our emotions. Fascinating, Jake mused. So what color are you now? Lyra laughed, a sound that filled the air with a lightness that made Jake smile. A gentle teal, I suppose, she said. It means curiosity and tranquility. Jake nodded, absorbing every word. And what brought you to Earth? You mentioned a malfunction and a storm? Yes, I was on a reconnaissance mission. We explore potential new worlds, places we might learn from or, in extreme cases, seek refuge. My ship was caught in a cosmic storm, and the navigation systems failed. The next thing I knew, I was crashing into your ocean. That's quite a journey, Jake replied, his voice full of empathy. It sounds lonely. It can be, Lyra admitted, her gaze drifting towards the sea. But meeting others, seeing places like Earth, it's worth it. Their conversation shifted as Jake shared stories of his own life. His early years in college, his decision to pursue freelance work, and his passion for the mysteries of technology. What about fun? What do you do for fun in Aquaria? Jake asked, eager to know more about her day-to-day life. We swim, of course, Lyra chuckled. We also engage in flow dancing. It's a form of dance that follows the currents of water. And we play a game somewhat like your soccer, but in 3 dimensions, underwater. That sounds amazing, Jake responded enthusiastically. Wish I could see that. Maybe one day. You will, Lyra said, a playful glint in her eyes. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Jake proposed an idea. You know, I have a friend, Marty, who's an amateur astronomer. Maybe we could meet with him? He'd be thrilled to learn about Aquarian astronomy, and I bet he has a few things to show us, too. Lyra seemed intrigued. I would like that. It's good to connect with others who look at the stars with wonder. Great, I'll call him, Jake said. He pulled out his phone and dialed Marty, who answered almost immediately. Hey, Marty, it's Jake. I've got a guest who's interested in stargazing. Thought it might be fun to come over to your place tonight. You in? Marty's voice boomed with excitement. Absolutely. Bring your guest over. The skies are clear tonight, and it's perfect for some cosmic sightseeing. Jake hung up and turned to Lyra with a smile. He's excited. Let's finish our drinks and head over. As they prepared to leave, Lyra's expression softened. Jake, I appreciate you doing this. Being here, talking to you. It's made me feel less like a stranded visitor and more like a guest. That's because you are a guest, Lyra, Jake reassured her, his tone warm. And I'm glad you're here. Together, they left the cottage under the fading light, ready to explore the stars with Marty. The evening promised new friendships and deeper connections, bridging worlds far beyond what Jake could have imagined when he woke up that morning. The drive to Marty's house was filled with light chatter, the evening air cool and inviting as it streamed through the open windows of Jake's car. Lyra seemed captivated by the terrestrial landscape, her eyes absorbing the sights with eager curiosity. So, Marty's place is a bit out of the way, Jake explained, his hands steady on the wheel. He's got a setup in his backyard, telescopes, computers, all sorts of gadgets. He's a bit of a night owl. Loves tracking satellites and meteor showers. It sounds like he's very passionate about the stars, Lyra observed, turning to Jake with a smile. He is, Jake nodded. And he's a great guy. I think you'll like him. As they arrived, Marty was already outside, setting up his equipment. A man in his late 50s with a bushy beard and twinkling eyes, he waved energetically as Jake and Lyra approached. Jake, my boy. And this must be your mysterious guest. Marty boomed, extending a hand to Lyra. Marty, pleasure to meet you. Lyra, she replied, taking his hand. Thank you for having us. Any friend of Jake is a friend of mine. Come, let me show you my pride and joy. Marty beckoned them toward a large, sophisticated-looking telescope pointed towards the heavens. As Marty explained the finer details of his equipment, Lyra listened intently, occasionally asking technical questions that made Marty raise his eyebrows in surprise. You really know your stuff, Marty commented with a grin. Ever used one of these before? Something similar. Back home, Lyra said, her tone modest. But yours seems much more advanced in some ways. Marty beamed, pleased with the compliment. Well, let's put it to use. The skies are clear tonight, and we might just catch a glimpse of the Andromeda Galaxy if we're lucky. The trio spent hours under the stars. Marty shared stories of celestial discoveries, and Jake found himself watching Lyra as much as the skies. Her face lit up with each new star they observed, her excitement infectious. During a break, as Marty fiddled with some equipment, Jake and Lyra found themselves alone, leaning against the hood of Jake's car. Marty's enthusiasm is quite something, Jake chuckled. It's hard not to feel excited about the universe when he's around. Lyra laughed softly. Yes, it's inspiring. It reminds me how much I miss exploring. Jake looked at her, struck by a sudden insight. You know, Lyra, if you want to stay on Earth a while longer, there's a lot more to see. And I'd be happy to be your guide. Lyra's eyes met his, a gentle seriousness within them. I'd like that, Jake. Very much. Their conversation drifted to dreams and aspirations, Lyra speaking of her hopes for her people, and Jake discussing his projects and ambitions. The night deepened around them, the stars blazing overhead as they shared thoughts and laughed together. Eventually, Marty called them back to the telescope. You two might want to see this, he said, stepping aside to give them room. Lyra peered through the telescope, and her breath caught. It's beautiful, she murmured as she stepped back to let Jake have a look. Jake took in the view, a brilliant cluster of stars, its beauty stark against the dark canvas of space. Incredible, he agreed. As they prepared to leave later, Marty clapped Jake on the shoulder. You two make a good team. Come back anytime. The stars aren't going anywhere. On the drive home, Jake turned to Lyra. Did you enjoy tonight? Very much, Lyra replied, her voice soft. Thank you, Jake, for sharing your world with me. Jake smiled, a warm feeling settling in his chest. It's my pleasure, Lyra. There's plenty more to explore, if you're up for it. Lyra nodded, her gaze on the night sky visible through the car window. I would love that. As Jake drove through the quiet streets, he realized that the universe might be vast and mysterious, but right here, with Lyra beside him, it felt a little more like home. The night after their stargazing adventure, Lyra and Jake sat on the couch in his living room, a fire crackling softly in the fireplace. The mood was cozy, a stark contrast to the vast, cold universe they had peered into the night before. Jake had been thoughtful all day, considering how best to support Lyra's ongoing exploration of Earth and her eventual need to reconnect with her people. Lyra, have you thought about how you'll contact your planet? I mean, to let them know you're okay? Lyra turned to him, her face reflecting the firelight. I have, but it's complicated. Our communication devices were damaged in the crash. I can repair them, but I need some specific materials, not easy to find on Earth. Maybe I can help with that, Jake offered eagerly. What do you need? I have some connections in the tech industry that might come in handy. Lyra hesitated, then nodded. I would appreciate that, Jake. Thank you. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Jake frowned slightly, not expecting anyone. He stood and went to answer it, finding his neighbor, Tom, on the porch. Tom was an engineer who often had quirky tech questions and knew Jake was the go-to guy for anything computer-related. Hey, Jake, got a minute? I'm trying to figure out something with my satellite dish setup, Tom said, holding up a tangle of wires and a digital meter. Sure, Tom, come on in, Jake replied, stepping aside. He noticed Lyra stiffen slightly and added, This is my friend, Lyra. She's visiting from out of town. Nice to meet you, Lyra, Tom said with a friendly nod, not picking up on her discomfort. Nice to meet you, Tom, Lyra responded, her voice calm. As Tom spread his technical dilemma out on Jake's coffee table, Lyra's curiosity overcame her initial reserve. She leaned forward to look at the equipment Tom had brought. What seems to be the problem? She inquired, her tone tinged with genuine interest. Tom explained the issue with his satellite reception, and Jake watched as Lyra listened intently, then began to offer suggestions. Her knowledge of the technology surprised Tom, who looked at Jake with raised eyebrows. She's pretty savvy, huh? Tom whispered to Jake, who just nodded, a proud smile on his face. Together, the three of them tinkered with the setup, Tom marveling at Lyra's intuitive grasp of the components. Eventually, they managed to not only fix the immediate problem, but also improve the system's overall efficiency. Thanks, you too. I owe you one, Tom said as he packed up his gear. Lyra, you ever think about a career in engineering? You've got a knack for it. Lyra laughed lightly. I'll consider it, she said diplomatically. After Tom left, Jake turned to Lyra with a curious gaze. You handled that well. Ever thought about what Tom said? Staying here, maybe making a life on Earth. Lyra's expression softened, and she looked at Jake, her eyes conveying a mix of emotions. It's tempting, especially with someone like you here, she admitted. But I have responsibilities to my people. I understand, Jake said, his voice gentle. Let's focus on getting you what you need to fix your communicator. We can take it from there. Lyra nodded, a grateful look in her eyes. Thank you, Jake, for everything. As they settled back into the couch, the fire casting a warm glow around them, Jake felt a strong connection to Lyra, one that went beyond the stars they had gazed at together. He knew that whatever decision Lyra made about her future, he wanted to support her, hoping that perhaps their paths could merge into one. The next morning, Jake and Lyra sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by schematics and various electronic components that Jake had gathered from his workshop. They were deep into the project of repairing Lyra's communicator. So, this component here needs to be calibrated very delicately, Lyra explained, pointing to a small, intricate device laid out on the table. It's sensitive to Earth's magnetic field, which is stronger than what we have on Aquaria. Jake nodded, his fingers carefully adjusting the tool he held. Like this? He asked, looking up at her for approval. Yes, exactly like that, Lyra smiled, impressed with his quick grasp of the technology. As they worked, Jake couldn't help but revisit their conversation from the previous night. Lyra, you mentioned responsibilities to your people. He began cautiously. What kind of responsibilities? If you don't mind me asking. Lyra paused, setting down her tools. She looked out the window for a moment before responding. I am, or I was, a scout for my people. We've been searching for a new home for decades. Aquaria is in peril due to environmental degradation. My mission was to find a planet suitable for habitation, or at least for resources we could use to save our own. Jake absorbed her words, understanding the weight of her task. That's a heavy burden to carry, he acknowledged. It is, Lyra agreed, her eyes meeting his. But meeting you, seeing Earth. It's complicated things, in both good and bad ways. How so? Jake asked, genuinely interested. Earth is beautiful and clearly capable of supporting life, but it's not right for us, not just because of the environmental differences, but because it's already home to a vibrant civilization. My people, we can't disrupt that. It's against everything we believe in. Jake felt a mix of relief and admiration. I respect that, he said, his respect for her deepening. So, what will you report back? That's where it gets complicated, Lyra sighed. If I report that Earth is unsuitable, my people will continue their search elsewhere. But it also means I'll be expected to return and continue scouting. Jake processed this, the thought of her leaving twisting in his gut. And if you stayed, he ventured softly. Lyra looked at him, her expression torn. I haven't decided yet. There are days when I think I could be happy here, with you. But leaving my mission, it feels like abandoning my people when they need me most. Their conversation was interrupted by the doorbell. Jake stood to answer it, finding his friend Eric on the doorstep. Eric was a tech enthusiast and an old college buddy. Hey Jake, I got that new processor we talked about. Thought you might want to check it out, Eric said, holding up a small package. Perfect timing, Eric. Come in. We're working on something that might actually need that, Jake replied, leading him to the kitchen. Lyra, this is Eric, another tech wizard, Jake introduced. Eric, this is Lyra. Nice to meet you, Eric said with a nod. What are you two up to? Lyra and Jake shared a look, and Jake nodded slightly. We're trying to repair a communication device. It's not from around here. Eric's interest piqued immediately. Oh, let's take a look then. For the rest of the morning, the three of them worked together, discussing possibilities and solutions. Eric was surprisingly unfazed by the alien technology, his curiosity driving him. As they worked, Jake watched Lyra interact with his friend, her ease and expertise on full display. It gave him hope that perhaps she could find a balance between her duties and a new life on Earth. When Eric left, promising to bring more tools, Jake turned to Lyra. You fit in here, Lyra. More than you think. Lyra smiled, a mix of sadness and hope in her eyes. Maybe, she whispered. Maybe. The next day, Jake and Lyra took a drive to a nearby natural reserve, a quiet place with a trail winding through lush greenery and a lake at its heart. Jake thought the serenity might help them both clear their minds. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, their steps crunching over the gravel path. Lyra finally broke the silence. I keep thinking about my duty, Jake. The reason I came here in the first place. And now, it feels like I'm being pulled in two directions. Jake glanced at her, nodding thoughtfully. It's not an easy choice. Your people need you, and I understand that. But, well, I'd be lying if I said I wouldn't miss you if you left. They reached the lake, its surface mirroring the sky in soft shades of blue and white. Jake sat on a nearby bench, patting the spot next to him for Lyra to join. I've never felt this close to anyone before, she admitted softly, sitting beside him. Earth is so strange and wonderful, and meeting you. It's changed me. Jake looked at her, his gaze steady. Maybe you don't have to choose between your duty and staying. There could be a way to bridge both worlds. How? Lyra asked, looking genuinely curious. I don't know yet, he said, rubbing his chin. But humans and Aquarians might have things to share, things to learn from each other. Maybe your role doesn't end with just scouting. Lyra let that idea settle, her expression contemplative. And you would be willing to help, even if it meant risking things for Earth? Yes, Jake answered without hesitation. Because you're worth it. And I think we could make something good out of this together. She smiled, her hand reaching for his. Thank you, Jake. You've been more than a friend. More than I could have ever expected from a chance encounter. They sat by the lake, holding hands, the silence between them now warm and full. Finally, Lyra spoke, her voice full of quiet determination. I think I'll report that Earth isn't suitable for settlement, but share what I've learned about your people, about you. Maybe that will be enough for my superiors to understand that we must respect each other's worlds. Jake gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. It sounds like the best decision, Lyra. And whatever happens, I'll be here for you. They stayed by the lake as the sun began to set, the two of them quietly planning a future that, while uncertain, felt full of possibilities. Possibilities that neither of them would face alone. Back at Jake's cottage, the final rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow through the windows. The small device they had worked so tirelessly on now lay completed on the table. Lyra held it in her hands, studying it with a look of both relief and nostalgia. Do you think it'll work? Jake asked, watching her closely. I believe so, she replied, her voice soft. This communicator can send a single, direct message to my people. Just one. Jake nodded, feeling a pang of sadness mixed with pride. So, this is goodbye then? Lyra looked up, meeting his gaze. It doesn't have to be, she said, reaching out to take his hand. I don't want to leave you, Jake. You've shown me a life here that I didn't know was possible. A quiet intensity filled the room. Jake stepped closer, his fingers tracing the line of her cheek. Then stay. We'll figure everything out. Together. Lyra's hand moved up to meet his, her touch warm and gentle. Are you sure? This would change things for you, too? Jake's voice was unwavering. I've never been more sure. They stood there, close and connected, their breaths mingling in the quiet of the room. Slowly, Lyra leaned in, and their lips met in a kiss that was both tender and filled with longing. It was as if every unspoken word, every shared moment, had built up to this. As they held each other, Lyra trembled slightly, her body responding to the emotions they had both held back. Her hand slipped behind his neck, pulling him closer, deepening their kiss. Jake's arms wrapped around her waist, guiding her gently towards the couch, their movements slow and filled with care. I've wanted this for so long, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Me too, Jake replied, his voice husky. They shared another kiss, this one more fervent, as they eased down together onto the couch. In that quiet, intimate space, every touch, every brush of fingers, and every shared glance was filled with a warmth that neither of them had ever known before. Later, they lay together, wrapped in each other's arms, feeling the steady rhythm of their heartbeats aligning. The communicator sat untouched on the table, and for the first time, its purpose felt secondary. Lyra looked up at Jake, her eyes soft and content. I think I'll send one message, she murmured. I'll tell them I found what I was searching for. Jake smiled, holding her closer. Then stay with me, Lyra. We'll make this work, no matter what. They stayed that way, wrapped in each other's presence as the night deepened, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side. In the warmth of that quiet room, they had found not just a connection between two worlds, but a home in each other,